Welcome to I24 News. You're watching Middle East Now. I'm your host, Bianca Zanini. Let's start with tonight's headlines. Lebanon elects Joseph Aoun as its new president. What's next for the country after more than 2 years with no head of state? We go live to the battlefield in Syria, where Turkish-led militias continue to clash with Kurdish fighters. And inspired by Assad's fall in Syria, a viral campaign in Egypt is pushing to overthrow President al-Sisi. We begin in Lebanon, where Army Chief Joseph Aoun has been elected as the country's next president. Lebanon had been without a head of state for more than 2 years. Aoun was elected in a second round of parliamentary voting earlier today. Our correspondent Emmanuel Honora has more.
Babda Palace isn't vacant anymore. Lebanon just voted in its next president after over 2 years of political deadlock. Lebanese Army General Joseph Aoun got 99 votes out of 126, 13 more than the 86 he needed in order to be voted in as president. The road leading to his election, however, was no easy task, with the Hezbollah-Amal alliance not awarding any votes to Aoun in a preliminary round of voting, giving him only 71 votes. After presumed negotiations and trade-offs during a 2-hour break leading to a second round of voting, the Hezbollah-Amal alliance appears to have softened their position on Aoun, allowing him to finally advance as president.
My pledge is to exercise my role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Supreme Defense Council, through which I will work to affirm the state's right to monopolize the bearing of arms.
International pressure on Lebanon's parliament to vote for Aoun as president couldn't be ignored. French envoy Jean-Yves Le Drian sat in the plenum watching over the vote, representing a series of countries voicing their support for Aoun, including Saudi Arabia and the US. The now former general of the Lebanese armed forces is now tasked with a mission to restore the country's crushing economy from 2019 and bring Lebanon back to its feet after a devastating war with Israel.
I vow to work for a country that invests in its army to control the borders and contribute to their consolidation in the south and their demarcation in the east, north, and sea. I vow to prevent smuggling, fight terrorism, preserve the unity of Lebanese territory, implement international resolutions, respect the truce agreement between Israel and Lebanon, and prevent Israeli attacks on Lebanese territory, an army with a doctrine.
With positive reactions pouring in over the election of General Aoun, a surprising accolade came from none other than Israel, with Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar stating that he hopes this choice will contribute towards stability, a better future for Lebanon and its people, and to good neighborly relations. With weeks to a deadline for the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire and Joseph Aoun dubbed in Lebanon as having a feel for battle, the new resident of Babda Palace has his work cut out for him.
And joining me now in the studio is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, as well as our very own I24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Dan, so Lebanon has a new president, and before we dive into what that means for the country, I want to ask you what it means for its neighbor, for Israel.
Well, Israel hopes that Lebanon will be stable and prosperous and led by people who oppose the idea that an Iran-backed militia like Hezbollah can control the border with Israel. Aoun, I believe, stands for all these things as well. He has stated clearly that he wants to enforce the monopoly of force in Lebanon and not have militias running around causing havoc. And he is the person who in the past, as head of the army, fought extreme jihadist forces in the north coming from Syria, which may put him in an interesting situation vis-a-vis Syria's new leadership. And in general, stability in Lebanon, I think, is in Israel's interest. Israel seeks good relations with Lebanon and has had implicitly, and sometimes with implausible deniability, good relations with Lebanon's Christians, Maronites and other Christians. I believe Aoun is not actually a Maronite, but he certainly is a Lebanese Christian. Notwithstanding the fact that Lebanon needs all kinds of reforms to become a properly functioning country, this is a step in the right direction, and that is good for Israel as well.
I wanted to ask you, Ariel, we heard from Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, congratulating him. What does this indicate? Was it expected?
Yeah, the first foreign minister to congratulate Joseph Aoun was Gideon Sa'ar of Israel. And we have to remember the two countries are in an active state of war. This is an indication that Israel hopes to see revitalized Lebanon. Lebanon will now enter a very important transitional phase as it moves away from the Iranian influence and towards the American-French influence, which for Israel is very important. And also Syria is undergoing a transitional period. So really Israel's northern border is potentially becoming a lot safer in the near future. Look, the main tasks that Aoun will have to deal with first, taking care of the south, of Hezbollah's deployment of its infrastructure. They're properly dismantling it, not what we're seeing right now, which is insufficient. According to all sources, anyone you ask in Lebanon will agree that what the Lebanese army is doing now, their slow deployment, it is inadequate. But also he will have to fight corruption. This is a major problem inside Lebanon, and we'll have to push for some significant reforms. We know that between the first and second round, the first round of the election today, he did not get the majority. He got 71 votes out of the 86 he needed. And then in the second round, he got 99. So what happened? In the interim, he met with Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, the head of Amal Party, the other Shiite. There's the Shiite duo in Lebanon, Hezbollah and Amal. He managed to split the Shiite vote. And to my understanding, Amal is probably going to retain the finance ministry in Lebanon. That was the expected deal. But it is interesting that the political wedge was created between the dynamic Shiite duo that so far has kept Lebanon in this stagnation.
All right, Ariel, Dan, stay with us. I want to bring into the conversation now Dr. Walid Phares, foreign policy expert and author of Iran, Imperialist Republic. Walid, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Lebanon, of course, is a mosaic of religions, and there are built-in rules and structures to try to reflect that. Explain to us a little bit how the power structure is divided and how that was reflected in these elections.
Well, on the one hand, you have the Constitution. You have the Constitution since the Ta'if Accord 3 decades ago in 1990. And then you have reality. Yes, there are communities, and each community is provided with a position inside the government. The president has to be Maronite. The Speaker of the House, Nabih Berri, is Shia. Sunni should be the head of the government, the executive branch. But reality on the ground is that regional forces have a lot of influence on what happened inside Lebanon. The major regional force was the Islamic regime in Iran. They had Hezbollah, and they had the ally Amal for a long period of time, for decades actually. But on the other hand, what happened in the region between Israel and Hezbollah was the first reason for why this election was possible, because Hezbollah had blocked the elections, had blocked the election of anybody who's not the ally. But then you have to keep an eye on Syria, where the HTS also destroyed Iranian and Hezbollah influence in Syria by bringing down Assad. But I don't think they have the same design as Lebanon. So yes, it's a very careful situation. It's very good that Joseph Aoun or someone like him were basically elected. But again, the challenges are going to be significant.
Right. You mentioned Hezbollah. Of course, they played an important player in this election as well. They've got their supporters, their allies, also Christian parties supporting them. How did this turn out for them? What does this mean for Hezbollah?
For Hezbollah, it's clear. This election is the result of a new balance of power. That is the result of the Israel-Hezbollah war. There is no doubt about that. Their leadership, Hezbollah's leadership, is not here. Iran's regime, of course, has been weakened. They counted on another faction, Shia faction, which is Nabih Berri, who made a choice on his own. He won the Ministry of Finances. He got it from Joseph Aoun. So now Hezbollah is going to be challenged. Hezbollah remains a large military force inside Lebanon. Let's not dream here. And it will take a challenge to remove it. Now the challenge, instead of being on the shoulders of Israel, America, and France, is going to be on the shoulders of the Lebanese army. That's the important development that occurred today.
Interesting. Well, Waleed, stay with us. I want to go back to the studio here with Dan Perry and Ariel Osseran. I want to get your take on this too, Ariel, what this election means for Hezbollah, not just in the short term, immediately, a bit of a blow, but what it could actually mean a bit longer term.
Look, we need to remember that the previous 12 attempts to elect a president since October of 2022 failed, and that happened under the looming presence of Hassan Nasrallah, the former chief of Hezbollah. That is the change that brought up upon this breakthrough. That is the only thing that changed from the 12th attempt to the 13th attempt, is that Hezbollah severely weakened. Nasrallah, the de facto head of state in Lebanon, is no longer there. And so this enabled this political shuffle to happen. Also, we're seeing this political shift, potential split between Amal and Hezbollah. So really the changes that happened in the Middle East, in the region following the death of Nasrallah, the toppling of the Assad regime in Syria, created this new climate in the region and specifically in Lebanon that enabled to bring upon this change.
All right, and Dan, we are 17 days away from the end of the current ceasefire. How might this new president affect the outcome of that, or how long it will hold? Let's put it that way.
Well, again, it's a good sign, because he said clearly he is beholden to the ceasefire and to the principles behind the ceasefire, which is that Hezbollah cannot have a military force doing anything of consequence to Lebanon, and certainly not a raid on the border. But there's more than one level here. The ceasefire is what interests Israelis in the short term. But in the longer term, and this should interest Israelis in the West and everyone, Lebanese included as well, is whether he makes good on what he suggested today, that he would actually move to implement UN Security Council resolutions, which are very much in Lebanon's interest, to have there not be armed militias in Lebanon. Now, if he does this, that is the sea change in Lebanon.
He also did say he vows to end Israeli occupation.
Well, now it depends if he is giving lip service to Hezbollah's nonsense about the Sheba farms being occupation, or if he's talking about Israel withdrawing from the south, where it currently still has troops, and that's legitimate enough. But it couldn't be stressed enough. Hezbollah and Nasrallah, basically, was the effective ruler of Lebanon a few months ago. This means Lebanon was under the boot, essentially, of Iran. Right now, there is a chance that Aoun, who is backed by the moderate Arab world and by Europe and by the US and by the international community, will act accordingly, and that is basically a complete pivot. It's a U-turn for Lebanon. And if he makes good on this, or if he even tries to make good on this, probably this will free up hundreds of millions of dollars in aid from the Gulf that have been held up because of fear that it would end up in the hands of Hezbollah and therefore Iran.
All right, and turning back now to Dr. Waleed Phares, foreign policy expert and author of Iran Imperialist Republic. I want to bring in now Iran. We talked about what this all means for Lebanon, for Israel, for Hezbollah. What about for Iran? Where does that country stand now?
Well, 2 points. Point number one, the Islamic Republic, or I call it the Islamic regime in Iran, also was devastated. They're not saying it, very few are saying it, but the world is devastated by the loss of the head of Hezbollah, specifically Hassan Nasrallah, and by the fact that Hezbollah right now cannot get any direction for any action. I'm not saying in the future, I'm saying right now. So the regime in Iran lost Hezbollah for now, lost Assad, its entire arm that used to stretch from Tehran through Iraq to the Mediterranean, and all the goodies in the Mediterranean and the gas and the stuff is lost for now. And of course, they don't have a front anymore, except maybe a little bit somewhere else, in Gaza against Israel. That was the raison d'etre of that regime. So now is the moment where, I hope in 12 days or so, a new American administration will have a different policy towards the Islamic Khomeinist regime and a different policy towards Hezbollah. So in few days, we will know, actually maybe in few weeks, but in few days, we'll see a different change, and a change in different policies in America, and that should seal the deal for Iran.
All right, and what are some of the main challenges that he's going to be facing? Because it's very hopeful to sit and say, we're going to see change, we're expecting this, he is supported by the U.S. What are the major challenges that he's going to be facing in order to actually be able to pull through some of these changes?
Excellent question. The military will tell you, the military analysts will tell you first, no matter all this brouhaha about him being elected, he is the effective commander of the Lebanese army. The Lebanese army has contingents that work with Hezbollah. So reality on the ground is simple. Hezbollah has 3 islands that they control in Lebanon. The southern suburb of Beirut has 800,000 people with all of the forces of Hezbollah. The south, but he has Israel challenging him. And the northeast, guess what's in the northeast, in Baalbek? On the other side of the border, now you have the jihadists coming, the HTS jihadists coming. So Hezbollah has a problem, but still has weapons. It's a decision that General, now President Aoun, will have to make. He will have to make sure that he has the backing of the United States. And of course, then the Arabs, the Europeans, Israel, everybody else will be in line to help. But first, we need to see what the administration wants to do. Is the president-elect Trump wants to try to have another last deal with the Islamic Republic or not? That is the big question.
All right, Dr. Walid Faris, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for your input and analysis.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now, more than 800 parents of IDF soldiers and reservists who've been called to fight in Gaza in the ongoing war have issued a public letter to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accusing him of, quote, unnecessarily risking their children's lives in a war that they say is without horizon and based solely on his own political interests. Now, yesterday, the number of soldiers killed in the ground offensive in Gaza reached 398. Meanwhile, today, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says 70 Palestinians have been killed just in the past 24 hours, including children. Israel and Hamas are engaged in negotiations, of course, to try to reach a ceasefire and hostages deal. But despite optimism from mediators, especially the Americans, an Israeli official said today that there have been no dramatic developments in talks in recent days. And we go now live to I24 News correspondent Robert Swift, who's with us from Hostages Square in Tel Aviv. Rob, what's the latest that we know on where this potential deal stands, and what are you hearing from the families of the hostages there?
So, as you've said, there are signs of optimism from the U.S. administration regarding this, although it has to be said that the U.S. has consistently set this tone when it comes to negotiations, and as we all know, that's gone nowhere so far. With regards to the families themselves, those who were here this evening and spoke a little bit earlier, they had a very clear message, and that was essentially that a deal is the only thing they believe that could get their loved ones out of Gaza. There was a press conference put on earlier by a series of families. Each of them had loved ones who'd been taken alive into Gaza and then been killed whilst in captivity. And the message that they stressed was essentially that military force is not an option if the objective is to return hostages alive from the Gaza Strip. They described themselves as a club of 29 different families who had all been in this situation, and they spoke repeatedly about the fact that they didn't want to see any other families joining this club. We had a chance to speak with one of them shortly after that press conference. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
The only success of the military pressure is killing hostages, as we can see. My sister got murdered by the terrorists of Hamas, but that's because the IDF got closer to this place. And we don't know enough where the hostages are, which means we need to stop the war, get into a deal that will release the hostages. It doesn't matter the order. We need to bring those people home by getting into a deal. And this deal means to stop the war for getting them out. It needs to be now, because tomorrow we will hear about another person that was murdered in captivity, and we can't allow that.
Now, there is renewed hope, renewed momentum that something could come through, that some form of negotiation could happen. But at the minute, it seems that the main reason for that renewed momentum is simply the pressure being applied by incoming U.S. President Donald Trump. In terms of what we're seeing on the ground, in terms of what the families themselves are saying, it doesn't seem like they see a specific actions from the Israeli or the Hamas side, which makes this more or less likely. They described the pressure being applied by Trump as an opportunity, and they said that they hoped that this opportunity would be taken.
Right. Rob, I wanted to ask you exactly that. The mood quickly here, before we don't have that much time, but the mood on Hostages Square, is there faith that this time it's actually going to happen, or is it just, are they just worried that it's more of the same?
Honestly, I've lost count of the number of times that I've been standing here speaking to the families. Months ago, people were saying to me, we've been here, we've done this all before. I don't want to get too optimistic, but yeah, obviously I still have hope. That was kind of the feeling that I again got this evening.
All right, Robert Swift live with us from Hostages Square. Thank you very much for that update. Yesterday, the IDF announced they retrieved the body of hostage Youssef Ziadni, who had been held in Gaza with his 22-year-old son since October 7th. His two other children were released in the first hostage deal over a year ago. But according to the IDF, Youssef's son is feared dead now, but there has been no official confirmation. Now, today, Youssef's family and friends gathered for a funeral, and I-24 News correspondent Balir Sladin was in Rahat, where Youssef was buried earlier today.
For 459 days, El Zayadni family and the residents of the Arab Bedouin city of Rahat waited to see Youssef back alive from captivity, but were struck by the tragic news yesterday when the authorities told them that his remains were found in Gaza, with strong indications that his son, Hamza, also abducted by Hamas, is also not among the living.
We waited, we hoped, like the whole people of Israel, all the families of the hostages, that the list is being finalized, that Youssef will come home with Hamza. But to our great regret, we received yesterday's bitter news that fell upon us all like thunder on a clear day that Youssef is no longer alive, and today we are burying him.
The whole city is in sorrow, and a day of mourning was announced. Youssef, a father of 18 children, among them 2 that were also abducted from the work in Kibbutz Holit on the morning of the 7th of October, but were fortunate enough to be released in November 2023 in the only deal that was conducted between Israel and Hamas.
Mourning throughout the Negev. Everyone is in mourning. Jew, Arab, everyone with a heart is mourning. Everyone loves their children. Ministers, the Prime Minister, need to think of our Bedouin community, not the way they do. Demolitions every Monday and Thursday. We don't have any other land. We have no other state. We are part of Israel.
This is not the first time that the family of El Zayadni opened a mourning tent for a relative who was killed as a result of October the 7th. Abdelrahim El Zayadni was also killed on that day when he was camping on Zikim Beach, north of the Gaza Strip. At least 23 Arabs were killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad on that day. 7 were taken hostage and 1 remains in captivity. Balir Sladin, Negev, Al-Naqab.
Now, as the war in Gaza continues, some IDF soldiers are choosing to speak out against some of the orders they were given while on active duty in the Strip, including setting fire to buildings. It's a small movement, but the soldiers say that this is just the tip of the iceberg, hoping to entice more people to speak up and pressure the government into a ceasefire. Emma Siegel brings us the details.
Israel has been at war with Hamas for over a year now, but some soldiers are refusing to continue fighting inside Gaza. More than 130 soldiers signed a letter saying they don't agree with the way the war is being fought and don't believe it will bring the remaining 100 hostages back home. A conference on Tuesday called The Refusal for War gave these soldiers a chance to speak to a packed audience of supporters.
So, for me at least, this event is to show the many Israeli troopers, soldiers that feel uncomfortable about the war, that feel moral apprehension about the orders they were given, that feel that something went very wrong in this country. The disgust and fear I felt from the orders I've been given, from the events I witnessed on our war fronts, from our officers, is something I could not share because there's such a strong social pressure within the army, within Israeli society, to keep silent, not to talk about the things that bother us about this war.
Left-wing member of Knesset said that there was a duty to refuse IDF service in the war.
Well, we're gathering here in order to call and support those who refuse to serve in the genocidal war in Gaza. This is not only a right, a conscience right, but this is actually a duty, a moral obligation to refuse to take part in the atrocities that Israel is responsible for in Gaza.
This comes as the army is working to recruit ultra-Orthodox young men who are eligible to serve. But while the IDF has created a new special track tailored to their religious and cultural needs, only 330 eligible men have enlisted out of 10,000 who were sent summons since July.
And still with me in the studio is Dan Perry and Ariel Osran. Dan, I want to ask you, as the war goes on, is this a movement that we can expect to see grow?
I do think it'll grow because even though Israel is a country that is no stranger to introspection, self-criticism has been suppressed instinctively, even by people who would normally be opponents of the government and very liberal and peaceable, because there is a sense that A, Israel had no choice but to act as it did, B, Israel is unfairly treated by the world community, and C, there's always a circling of the wagons. But right now, there is more than a sense that the war needs to come to an end, and that diminishes the willingness to put up with what people think is excessive. So for both reasons that are moral, like people who believe that Israel's doing the wrong thing, but also political because they want to force the government to bring an end to the war, I think you'll see more and more of this.
All right, thank you very much. We have to go out now for a short break, but there's a lot more to unpack when we're back. We'll go live to the battlefield in Syria and discuss Iran's possible next steps. Not going anywhere.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Welcome back to Middle East Now. I'm Bianca Zanini. We move now to Syria, where intense fighting between Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish-led militias in the northern part of the country has resulted in dozens of deaths, further heightening the regional instability. Turkey continues to pressure Kurdish militias, with President Erdogan warning of a potential cross-border offensive, while talks are underway to involve U.S. and French troops in securing a buffer zone to address Turkey's security concerns. More in this report.
Fierce clashes between Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish-led forces have killed 37 people in Syria's northern Manbij region. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights say that 26 Turkish-backed fighters and 6 SDF militiamen, as well as 5 civilians, were the latest casualties in a widening conflict in the increasingly restive region of Syrian Kurdistan.
The northeast, as well as part of Aleppo city, remain under the control of SDF and YPG. Despite a US brokered ceasefire near Manbij in December, there have been reports of clashes and exchanges of artillery fire between the SDF and the Syrian National Army forces in particular.
The latest battles come despite U.S. efforts to address Turkish concerns in Syria, to dissuade their NATO ally from launching a major offensive against Washington's Kurdish allies.
It has been 14 years and this war continues. We thought that Syria today had entered a new stage after the fall and escape of Assad. We thought that we had gotten rid of all of this, but this attack on us changed everything. And those who came in are taking orders from Turkey.
Turkish-backed factions in Syria resumed their fight against Kurdish forces at the same time the rebel coalition launched their offensive, which toppled the Assad government. At least 322 people have been killed in fighting in the Manbij countryside since last month. Meanwhile, a Syrian Kurdish official says that talks are taking place on whether U.S. and French troops could secure a border zone in northern Syria as part of efforts to defuse tensions with Turkey, after Ankara warned that it intends to carry out a cross-border offensive against the Kurdish YPG militia if the group doesn't meet Turkish demands.
The circle is closing for the separatist organization PKK and its YPG charter in Syria.
The YPG is the core force in the U.S. allied SDF and plays a key role in guarding ISIS prison camps. They have largely been on the back foot since the fall of the Assad regime, raising fears of a resurgent Islamic State.
And we go now live to Badr Khan Ahmed, a reporter who's joining us live from the fighting in Manbij right now. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you're staying safe. What's happening on the ground there where you are?
Well, now I just moved to a safe area. It's more now in the northeast, but I was there yesterday and I was there also this morning. There was a convoy of civilians from northeastern Syria cities, specifically from Kobani, heading to Shirin Dam, which is in the north, in the countryside of Aleppo. This Shirin Dam, it's one of the important dams that can produce electricity to the region, and it's on the Euphrates River. So the people were heading to this dam for ask for one message was that the war has to stop in Syria. Maybe it's a little unusual for the Syrian situation that after the fall of Assad, that the war is still continue in the north of Syria, and this is something unusual. After the fall of Assad, the people or the Syrian people has to live in a peaceful in all the regions or in all the territories in Syria.
I also want to add here for our viewers that the visuals that you're just seeing were filmed by you earlier today and yesterday. We see there the civilians, some of the civilians that you mentioned. Now, how quickly is this escalating and how rapidly do you see this situation worsening?
Well, I think that the Shirin Dam, for example, it's one of the important dams, and now it's out of working, out of the service. That was producing electricity to many different places around this dam. But what the people are asking is a clear message that the war has to stop, and there is no reason. And they are saying that there is no reason for Turkey to attack these places. The people, or the Syrian people, or the Syrian factions, for example, let's say now in Syria has only two main forces, which is one is the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the other one was the HTS previously, and now it's the new government. So now it's only these two different forces that they can solve the Syrian problems between themselves as Syrian, and there is no need for Turkish interfere in the situation there. And we can see also that for the Syrian Democratic Forces, keeping and protecting Tishrin Dam, it's a military important or in geography position for them, because for them when Tishrin Dam is not in their control, it means that the Turkish army backed with some other factions, that they can enter to northeastern Syria, and this will be a danger for the Kurdish society here in this region.
Right. I want to ask you, you've been covering this quite intensively for quite a while. Is this bigger issue something that can be resolved militarily, or what will it take to reach a solution, even if only temporary? I mean, we have the civilians calling and saying that there's no need for fighting, but that is the situation right now.
According to some statements from the general of the Syrian Democratic Forces, Mazloum Abdi, he explained to the media, or he explained to the people, that they are ready for listen to the Turkish concerns about Syria or about northeastern Syria. If they are worried about that we having guns in our hands close to their borders, we are ready to get far from the border and to put it like a zone or area that it's not holding weapons. And also they have mentioned that they are ready, if they have about some fighters or some soldiers in our army that they are not Syrian, they are ready also to tell them that they need to come back to their places, that they could be from Turkey or could be from other places. So it means, we can see that the Syrian Democratic Forces, they are ready for listen to what is Turkey is concerned about it in Syria. But what I have listened from the society or the people on the ground, that the Turkish government, they have a problem with the Kurdish people, and they don't want. They have a power or let's say an administration in their area in Syria, because that means that Turkey has to solve the Kurdish issue also in their country, because there is more than 20 million of Kurdish people in Turkey without rights there.
All right, Badr Khan Ahmed, thank you very much for your update. Of course, stay safe there in the battlefield.
Thank you.
Now, Iran's top general in Syria said last week that the Islamic Republic was, quote, defeated very badly by the fall of Bashar al-Assad. This week, two senior IRGC commanders said that Iran is currently unable to retaliate against Israel's last strikes in October due to financial constraints and the loss of its key Syrian ally. Now, still with me in the studio is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst, and I-24 News Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Ariel, tell me, what more do we know about these statements, and how serious should they be taken?
Right, so these aren't reports or anything, rumors or anything like that. These is a leaked audio recording by Iran's top-ranking general in Syria, Brigadier General Behrouz Esbati, describing the final hours of the Assad regime, saying that at 2 o'clock in the morning on that fateful December 8th, they realized that Damascus would fall, and they decided to withdraw. And he basically contradicted the official line that is coming out of Tehran, that is trying to downplay the significance of the fall of the Assad regime strategically for Tehran, saying we were defeated very badly, took a very big blow, and things have been very difficult. Now, he also added that Assad had denied multiple offers by pro-Iranian militias to carry out attacks from Syrian territory on Israel in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks. But I think most notable is where Russia plays into this. Esbati accuses the Russian betrayal, quote unquote, to that led to the fall of the Assad regime, saying that Russia played a major role in marginalizing Iran's activity in Syria by disconnecting their radar air defense systems related to Israeli air activity over Syria. Now, this, I think, is a key quote. He's saying Russia played a pivotal role in the assassination of senior IRGC commanders in Syria by Israel, especially the killing of General Said Ghazi Mousavi in Damascus in late December 2023. Mousavi was one of the key IRGC officers coordinating Iranian activity in Syria, in Lebanon. And so this gives us a very interesting glimpse into the reality of how Iran perceives this, the fall of the Assad regime.
Certainly very interesting. Dan, betrayal by Russia, fall of Assad, Hezbollah weekend. Iran is still standing. What are the options? Where can it look to right now to keep some sort of relevance and to keep its axis of resistance still alive, still fed?
Well, there's an implied assumption in your question that it has any reason to maintain an axis of resistance in a region which is a chaos project and interfering in other countries. I think their wise option, if they care about the Iranian people, would be to cease and desist from any such activity. We hear the Iranian general talking about how they have financial constraints. They always had financial constraints. It was always stupid for the Iranians to spend billions of dollars trying to influence events in Lebanon and Yemen.
And yet they did.
And yet they did. So perhaps now they are rerouting to a different strategy. That would be great, and it would be even greater if the Islamic Republic allowed free elections in which they would be crushed. Look, the betrayal in Syria is clearly true because Russia has its own imperatives. Russia was coordinating with Israel in Syria. Obviously, Russia was not going to allow Iran to achieve its full ambitions in Syria. And in the end, Russia decided to cut its losses and abandon Assad while welcoming him to Moscow. The loss of partial control over Syria, the loss of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the thrashing of their air defenses in Israel's last attack obviously renders Iran weaker. The incoming Trump administration might well be more aggressive towards Iran as well. So it's conceivable that we'll see an azimuth shift in their global strategy.
Ariel, you wanted to add something?
So we've been discussing this reconstruction of Lebanon moving away from the Iranian influence, Syria moving away from the Iranian influence. The next place that we should keep our eyes set is Iraq. Yesterday, the Prime Minister visited Tehran. There's a plan to disband the pro-Iranian militias to incorporate them under the Popular Mobilization Front, the Hashd al-Sha'bi. One should not assume that Iran will not continue to try and interfere with internal Iraqi politics through Hashd al-Sha'bi, but I think Iraq is the next focus, anyone who is keeping an eye on the region.
All right, Ariel Osran, thank you very much for your input. Dan, stay with us. Iran's military and domestic struggles are affecting its international relations. Iraq's prime minister, as we just mentioned, visited Tehran yesterday, with the leaders focusing on strengthening the ties. Now, the visit comes as Iraq is struggling with a deepening electricity crisis in the middle of a harsh winter, with blackouts stretching to 19 hours a day in some regions. Now, the crisis is worsened by Iran's own energy struggles, having reduced gas exports to Iraq, which is heavily dependent on Iranian gas. Now, joining me now is Entifadi Kanbar, former spokesperson for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq and president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Iraq facing a major electricity crisis, exacerbated by Iran's own domestic energy crisis. Iraq's electricity minister announced that there is a plan to better the situation, but what are we looking at right now? What do we know?
Well, basically, Iraq has been negligent about, or the Iraqi government negligent about dealing with this problem. Why? They were afraid to find alternative gas because they didn't want to upset their bosses in Tehran. What we have in Iraq, billions of cubic meters of flared gas. No one wants, and there's been promises after promises to be invested and captured by the Iraqi government, but they failed due to intentional sabotage, if you want to call it, by some elements of the government, like the militias who are part of the government, who are loyal to Iran, and they want to continue the buying of gas from Iran. And unfortunately, the Biden administration repeatedly gave Iraq exceptions from the sanctions to pay Iran tens of billions of dollars. Iran is not a reliable country, is not a stable country. They have their own problems. And the relation between Iran and Iraq is basically one-way relationship. Iran sees Iraq as a cow they could milk and lungs for their falling economy to deplete Iraq. Yesterday, I don't know if you have noticed, Reuters put out an amazing article, very long article, with schematic and drawings and details about how Iraq is actively smuggling Iranian oil. The Iraqi government, the Iraqi Ministry of Oil, the Iraqi state banks processing smuggled Iranian oil on behalf of Iran to violate the sanctions and put Iraq under the risk of major sanctions from the upcoming Trump administration.
All right, certainly a complicated relationship between Iran and Iraq. I want to ask you about another announcement from Iraq. It says that it has completed the construction of 400 kilometers of a 615-kilometer concrete wall along its border with Syria. Why is Iraq building that wall?
Well, the Iraqi government wants to stay away from the Syrian conflict, but we have two governments in Iraq. The official Iraqi government that you see a prime minister of, and a second behind-the-scene government run by the militias and al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, the popular mobilization forces. And those people are maneuvering near the borders of Syria, massing their militias near the border of Syria, absent from the eye and the coordination with the Iraqi government. So what you see from the Iraqi government is one thing, but what you see on the ground is another thing. And Prime Minister Soudani, he has the full intention to control the militias, but he cannot. He's too weak. He's too afraid of Iran. Imagine yesterday, Khamenei, a leader of a foreign country, a non-Iraqi leader, tells the Prime Minister of Iraq, you should not dissolve the militias and you should keep them. This is a severe interference into the sovereignty of Iraq. And the problem, this interference of Iran in Iraq became normalized, became almost acceptable internationally, especially the United States. The United States should issue a statement, or Secretary Blinken, condemning this interference and pressuring Iraqi government not to allow this. But you see, the United States, unfortunately, the Biden administration has been tolerating this because they want to appease Iran.
All right, Intifad Kanwar, thank you so much for your analysis and your input this evening. We really appreciate it. In Egypt, a campaign against President al-Sisi is circulating online in the wake of the fall of Syria's Assad regime. Emma Siegel has the story.
1 month since Syrians toppled the Assad regime, unrest is brewing online in Egypt. The hashtag, quote, "It's your turn, dictator," targeting Egyptian President Sisi is trending across Arabic social media. The slogan is a play on the graffiti, "It's your turn, doctor," written on a wall in Syria in 2011, aimed at the now ousted Syrian president. The anti-Sisi campaign began with Twitter user Ahmed al-Mansour, an Egyptian fighter with the Syrian rebel group HTS. In his post, he calls for the Egyptian people to rise against oppression. Meanwhile, Egypt's former Minister of Parliamentary Affairs cautioned against calls for an uprising.
Those who warn of the collapse of the state should stop eroding its foundations. It is to protect the people, not to oppress them, and to improve conditions, not to squeeze them, and to preserve dignity, not insult it, and respect its will, not to mock it or belittle it.
Since Sisi rose to power in 2013 following a military coup, there have been ongoing reports of disappearances and crackdowns on dissenters. With over 65,000 political prisoners in his jails, human rights groups say that torture has become systematic state policy. In a bid to manage public debt in 2024, the Egyptian government introduced austerity measures, slashing subsidies and increasing taxes. These steps have had significant impacts on the population. And now, with Assad gone, Sisi's grip on power is under increased scrutiny as the spotlight turns to his own authoritarian rule.
Azerbaijan and Armenia is threatening to reignite years-long conflicts between the two nations. The Azerbaijani president Ilham Aliyev is accusing Armenia of posing a, quote, fascist threat that needs to be destroyed. Aliyev threatened further military action if Armenia does not comply with Azerbaijan's territorial demands, more specifically, to open the so-called Zangezur corridor, which would create a land link between Azerbaijan and Turkey through Armenian land. Now, Armenia's leader called the comments a possible attempt to justify a fresh conflict. And joining me now to break this down is Rafi Aliot, a political risk analyst in Yerevan, Armenia. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. An escalation of words and rhetoric, how serious would you say that this is?
It's very hard to tell at this point for a couple of reasons. It is probably rhetoric. For one way of looking at the situation is that the Azerbaijani president is setting the tone for an incoming Trump presidency, hoping that they will be able to maximize their leverage with a new administration in Washington and then try to push a maximalist agenda on Armenia as part of their apparent peace negotiation process. However, there are other aspects at play here, namely obvious rearmament on the Azerbaijani side, an increase of flights from known military suppliers to Azerbaijan, as well as claims by the Azeri MOD, which were incidentally disproven by EU observers, that Armenian forces were involved in a ceasefire violation. And there are precedents in the last few years where Azerbaijan ups the rhetoric, usually the accusation of Armenia being fascistic for some reason, followed by accusations of ceasefire violations. Then we see these increase in arms supplies before there's some kind of a large-scale disturbance of the peace. So at this point, it's still unclear. However, most analysts think that at the moment it's mostly rhetoric.
Right. I want to ask you about something you mentioned, the potential timing of this with President Trump coming in. Is there a reason for it to be brought up now, specifically?
Yeah, so it's about setting the tone of the relationship. Aliyev is hoping for a fresh start with a new administration. The Biden administration was quite harsh, relatively speaking, on Azerbaijan. However, even the Biden administration never took very concrete steps to sanction Azerbaijan for committing an ethnic cleansing of the entire population of Nagorno-Karabakh just over a year ago. However, there's hope that because President Trump personally has ties with a lot of Turkish and Azerbaijani business people, claims to have good relations with Erdogan, the president of Turkey, which is the main ally and sponsor of Azerbaijan, and also the tight relationship, incidentally, which would be of interest to this show, the tight relationship that the Trump administration has with Israel and the support that Trump has promised Israel in any conflict with Iran is something that Azerbaijan, which neighbors Iran, as does Armenia, incidentally, is hoping to capitalize on, or at least the distraction of any conflict with Iran would benefit Azerbaijan in attempting to exert some maximalist demands on Armenia, either diplomatically or militarily, if they attempt that.
All right, Rafi Aliot, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And I want to bring this to the studio now. Dan, we were talking earlier, you've been to Armenia many times, and you mentioned that there's something interesting, not just about what was said, but how Aliyev said it.
Yeah, Aliyev has designs on sovereign Armenian territory, which is different from Nagorno-Karabakh, which was a self-governing enclave populated by Armenians, but within the territory, the recognized territory of Azerbaijan. Now, there is a fear in Armenia, and that fear is backed by Western intelligence, that they intend to invade Armenia to seize this corridor, which would create a land bridge to Turkey, and basically extend Turkey's influence via a land bridge and a trade route all the way to Central Asia. Aliyev has been talking suddenly about this fiction of Armenian fascism and how it must be destroyed, and if the Armenian leadership doesn't destroy it, then he, Aliyev, would destroy it for them. Now this mirrors almost one-to-one the rhetoric of Vladimir Putin before he invaded Ukraine. And basically, is more than just analogous. It is like a red flag and all alarms blazing from the perspective of Armenia, which puts Israel in a very interesting situation. Israel has, a somewhat shameful alliance with Azerbaijan. Shameful because this is one of the world's most despotic regimes, but it is clearly a case of realpolitik in the extreme. Azerbaijan gives Israel a forward base vis-a-vis Iran. It buys Israeli weapons that have been used against the Armenians, and it sells Israel oil. But Israel may not want to aid and abet an invasion of Armenia and a seizure of the corridor, because that would work very much to further embolden Turkey, which Israel has an issue with right now. So, complicated.
Very complicated. Dan Perry, thank you very much for your input, your analysis, for being with us in the show this evening. That is all we have time for in this broadcast, but thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with more news and in-depth analysis from Israel and the Middle East. Have a good weekend. I'm Bianca Zendini.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing i24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the i24 News app today.
Entonces, actualmente tenemos muchas manifestaciones.
بيعاونها ما نديرش ما نساهمش معكم نساهم معكم
49 Israeli hostages remain in Hamas captivity in Gaza following the retrieval of the body of an Israeli man from a terror tunnel in Rafah this week. Youssef al-Ziyadneh has today been laid to rest at home. Poland's president reportedly asks the country's government to guarantee Benjamin Netanyahu won't be arrested if he attends a Holocaust memorial ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz Nazi death camp later this month. We look at the implications. And it's red carpet treatment for Lebanon's new president. Army Chief Joseph Aoun fills a leadership role left vacant for 2 years. We take a deeper look at what this means for Lebanon, for Hezbollah, for Israel, and for the fragile ceasefire across the northern front. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for joining us. An Israeli hostage murdered in Hamas captivity in Gaza has today been laid to rest at his home in the Bedouin town of Rahat. 53-year-old Youssef al-Ziyadneh had 19 children. He was abducted with 3 of them on the 7th of October during the terror rampage while working at a kibbutz. The 2 youngest teenagers, Bilal and Aisha, were released in the first hostage truce deal after more than 50 days in captivity. The fate of his 22-year-old son, Hamza, is still not clear. Earlier this week, Youssef's body was found in a terror tunnel in Rafah by Israeli troops operating in the area and was brought home for burial. Correspondent Balir Sladin was at the funeral and filed this report.
For 459 days, al-Ziyadneh family and the residents of the Arab Bedouin city of Rahat waited to see Youssef back alive from captivity, but were struck by the tragic news yesterday when the authorities told them that his remains were found in Gaza, with strong indications that his son, Hamza, also abducted by Hamas, is also not among the living.
We waited, we hoped, like the whole people of Israel, all the families of the hostages, that the list is being finalized, that Youssef will come home with Hamza. But to our great regret, we received yesterday's bitter news that fell upon us all like thunder on a clear day that Youssef is no longer alive, and today we are burying him.
The whole city is in sorrow and a day of mourning was announced. Youssef, a father of 18 children, among them 2 that were also abducted from the work in Kibbutz Holit on the morning of the 7th of October, but were fortunate enough to be released in November 2023 in the only deal that was conducted between Israel and Hamas.
Mourning throughout the Negev. Everyone is in mourning. Jew, Arab, everyone with a heart is mourning. Everyone loves their children. Ministers, the Prime Minister, need to think of our Bedouin community, not the way they do. Demolitions every Monday and Thursday. We don't have any other land. We have no other state. We are part of Israel.
This is not the first time that the family of al-Ziyadneh opened a mourning tent for a relative who was killed as a result of October the 7th. Abdelrahim al-Ziyadneh was also killed on that day when he was camping on Zikim Beach, north of the Gaza Strip. At least 23 Arabs were killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad on that day. 7 were taken hostage and 1 remains in captivity. Balir Sladin, Negev, Al-Naqab.
Devastating indeed. And now for more on all the security developments across the region, we welcome to studio Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast The Lapin Assessment on Patreon and a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran. Thank you both so much for being here. Youssef al-Ziyadneh, as we heard in that report, Jews are mourning, Arabs are mourning, the nation is mourning. It's devastating, this development, and it speaks to the pain across the nation right now. The question remains, Yaakov, military action, is it making a difference? Is a deal needed, and is it needed now? Your assessment.
Right, and I would say that, you know, this joint mourning that you just described is a reminder that Hamas went after both Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, made no distinguishment in its genocidal attack, and it's a reminder that we have a common fate here, these two communities, and I think that most of us understand that very well. Look, regarding military action in the Gaza Strip, the goal here is first of all to make sure that Hamas does not re-entrench itself in Gaza. That's what's going on in northern Gaza. Of course, there's a second goal, which is to apply pressure on whatever remains of Hamas's leadership. That's Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya's brother, and his inner leadership group. They're the ones who are still kind of calling the shots in the Gaza Strip. They don't have total command over the terror cells that are operating in a very decentralized manner, but they're under pressure. There's not a day that goes by that there's not a significant, let's say, attack that they absorb from the air, from the ground, and the IDF is also paying with the lives of its soldiers for these operations. So Israel has multiple goals here, and obviously one of the most central ones is to apply more pressure on Hamas. There's no other way to do it except military pressure. That's the primary way to do it. And we'll have to see, whether this is going to result in a partial deal. That's what's on the table right now, a partial deal. Hamas is not offering a full deal. It's not on the table. It's not realistic from their perspective. It's in their interest, tragically, to hold on to at least a minimal number of hostages, because that's their insurance policy. And that's a terrible truth that I think we're going to have to reckon with going forward. That's at least as far as I can tell the situation as of now.
From a security perspective, can Israel afford to take the deal? Can it afford to not take the deal?
Well, I think that if Hamas gives up, and it appears that it has given up, its demand for the IDF to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, it's calling on a redeployment, but it's not calling on the IDF to leave a Philadelphia corridor in the southern part of Gaza. It's not calling on the IDF to leave the Netzarim corridor in the northern part of Gaza. If those demands are not being made by Hamas, I think Israel can afford to go for a partial deal. It will still be hard for Israel to come back into the fighting afterwards, but it'll be inherently possible. So as long as the IDF is not being forced to leave the Gaza Strip, I think Israel can afford to make this kind of deal, yes.
The pressure internationally out of the US has been top of mind for the Biden administration and now the incoming Trump administration as well. Many threats from Donald Trump before he even gets to the Oval Office. What kind of impact is that likely having on the decision makers as we speak?
Well, we can only take what we hear at face value. Moussa Abu Marzouk, senior Hamas official, saying that the Trump effect is what is contributing to the talks moving forward. Again, we've been in this juncture many times in the past. Until there is actually a deal that is signed and announced, again, it will be announced first by the Qatari Foreign Ministry. We should keep that in mind. It's up in the air, but there is a sense that this Trump effect is playing a significant factor. The threat that all hell will break loose if Hamas does not return all the hostages by the time he takes office. January 20th. Now, the deal, as Yaakov said, the deal that is on the table is a partial deal, not a comprehensive deal. So already that is not going to be the case, even if there is a deal, and we're not there yet. So there, besides that, there is the sense that talks are ongoing. There are diplomatic efforts in Doha, Qatar, in Cairo, Egypt, but still nothing significant and concrete that we can report. And the families of 99 hostages are still waiting for this update, for the word regarding their loved ones returning home.
Agonizing wait indeed. And so it continues. Gentlemen, stay with us. Much more to discuss. But on that very point, let's check in right now live with correspondent Robert Swift. He joins us from Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. So we're talking about the U.S. impact. We know the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, believes a ceasefire hostage deal is very close. The Biden administration hoping this deal will be secured before the end of their term, but that's some 10 days away now. What are people there at Hostage Square saying, Rob? What can you tell us?
That's right. I mean, you'll no doubt recall Antony Blinken has made comments like that half a dozen or more times over the last 6-8 months, and there's been no deal yet. But the hostages' families that I spoke with this evening, they did talk about the Trump effect, the hope that the momentum that's been injected by the incoming president's comments on the hostage deal, that this might add some momentum that both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side will feel that they can't refuse. Now, there was a press conference here in Hostages Square this evening where a number of families who had had loved ones taken alive into Gaza but then killed whilst in captivity, they spoke here. They described themselves as a club of 29 families who were all in that situation, and they spoke repeatedly about their hope that no other families will join their club, that no other families will go through this sort of grief. Let's have a listen to what some of them had to say earlier today.
We, all of us standing here, are the members of a cohort of loss and bereavement. We don't want any more people to join our community of agony and pain. And yet, tragically, just yesterday,
more than one of the people speaking tonight spoke about their belief that the concept that military pressure is a way to release the hostages is just been proven by the last 12 or so months to be ineffective. They spoke about how they felt that this, in actual fact, was a threat and a danger to the hostages, and that it wasn't going to bring the outcome that the Israeli government says that it is seeking from it. We spoke to one of the speakers shortly after the press conference. Let's have a listen to what he has to say.
The only success of the military pressure is killing hostages, as we can see. My sister got murdered by the terrorists of Hamas, but that's because the IDF got closer to this place. And we don't know enough where the hostages are, which means we need to stop the war, get into a deal that will release the hostages. It doesn't matter the order. We need to bring those people home by getting into a deal. And this deal means to stop the war for getting them out. It needs to be now, because tomorrow we will hear about another person that was murdered in captivity, and we can't allow that.
And as I said before, there is a sense among these families that there may be an opportunity here off the back of the momentum from Trump, but I didn't get the sense that they were overly optimistic, that they were too hopeful, because we've been in this situation a dozen or more times before, where there is some hope that a breakthrough will occur, and then it doesn't. So until that moment arrives, these families are left waiting with bated breath.
461 days, unconscionable. Correspondent Robert Swift, thank you for the update live from Tel Aviv. And now we bring you news just in. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, a developing situation, siren sounding a short while ago. Tell us more, what's going on?
Yeah, two batches of sirens, one suspected drone infiltration in the area of Kibbutz Gvulot, that's in southern Israel. Another shortly after of incoming rockets, again in that area, likely interceptor or shrapnel. The understanding is that there was something that was intercepted and that the incident is over. That is according to the IDF Home Front Command. Not quite clear if this drone came from Gaza, came from Yemen. We're still awaiting an official update from the IDF, but the sirens for drone infiltration in southern Israel, the incident is over, according to Home Front Command, with a probable successful interception.
And Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran will keep tabs on those developments and bring us updates as they emerge. Talking of Gaza, on the ground, the death toll in the Israeli retaliatory ground operation in the Strip is now at 396. The IDF confirming overnight that 3 soldiers were killed in fighting in northern Gaza. First Sergeant Matityahu Perel, First Sergeant Kenu Kassa and First Sergeant Neville Fisher served in the 46th Battalion of the 401st Armoured Brigade. Meanwhile, the Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, says more than 46,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war in Gaza, without indicating how many of those killed were terrorists. It's just over 15 months since the war broke out, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. The Israeli military says it's killed more than 17,000 1,000 terrorists since then. It also says it's tried to avoid harming civilians, pointing out how Hamas uses civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, for terror purposes. Still in studio, Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast, The Lapin Assessment on Patreon, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. But Ariel, I'm coming straight to you first because a developing situation also in Gaza as we speak. New information, what can you tell us?
Yeah, the IDF sharing that in joint operation with the Shin Bet, it managed to eliminate in precision airstrikes in the Gaza City area numerous senior commanders in the Sabra battalion, also commanders in the Nukhba. The head of the battalion, Osama Abu Namos, was eliminated along with his deputy as well as other Nukhba fighters. Look, as long as the IDF remains on the ground in Gaza, they will continue to find targets, especially with these arrests of key suspects. The longer they stay on the ground, the more, the deeper they can infiltrate Hamas's ranks in terms of intelligence. And however, we do have to state that as far as the strategic goals are concerned, already back in June, I was told by forces on the ground that those were achieved. And so in the absence of a decision to remove the forces, they will continue to operate there and try to maximize their achievements. And if we look at the day after in Gaza, with Israel saying that they will continue to maintain freedom of operation militarily there, we could still see these kinds of precision airstrikes even after the war in Gaza is over. But as long as the forces are there, they continue to gather crucial intelligence that help Israeli forces eliminate these senior Hamas commanders.
Yaakov, your take on these ongoing strikes inside Gaza as we speak?
This is the new normal in Gaza, and I think it's going to continue not for months, for years. And all I have to do is look at the West Bank. You know, we're more than 20 years after Operation Defensive Shield, which, defeated the lion's share of suicide bomber terrorism of Hamas and PIJ. And every single night, the IDF is moving into Area A of the West Bank to neutralize new terror threats. I don't think it's going to be different in the Gaza Strip. The IDF is going to continue to operate. It won't have 3 divisions like it has now operating across Gaza. It will be less. I don't see the IDF leaving Netzarim corridor or Philadelphia corridor anytime soon. There's some, real military infrastructure that has been built there and enables the IDF to go out on raids from there. Look, at the end of the day, if we want to talk about a different Gaza, that cannot happen if the IDF leaves Gaza now. If the IDF leaves Gaza now, all that will happen is that Hamas will come rolling back in, entrench itself, start rebuilding its weapons, industry, start planning the next attack on Israel. That will result in reversing all of the gains. So there will be no quick solutions here. There may be a temporary truce to enable a partial hostage deal, as we've been talking about. But I have no doubt that after that happens, if it happens, and hopefully it will, the IDF will move right back in and resume its operations, because the alternative, definitely for the next few months, the alternative to that is Hamas coming back into Gaza and taking it over again.
And when Hamas, the Gazan Health Ministry run by Hamas says 46,000 Palestinians have been killed in the war in Gaza and doesn't distinguish between terrorists and civilians. What do you make of that toll? No doubt internationally the media will use that number without any checks, without any distinctions either. But the toll is high. What do you make of it? How long can this continue for without there being a solution? Some kind of end in sight, as Ariel is mentioning, a plan for the day after.
So I think those are 2 different things. There should be a plan for the day after, but I don't think that's an end. I don't think there is such a thing as an end. There is no end state to this situation. That's my belief and my assessment. We are going to be dealing with the remnants of Hamas for decades in the Gaza Strip. The jihadist ideology is far too entrenched for us to expect that, in a month, 2 months, this conflict will be over. The war might end, but the conflict is going to go on for many, many years. And so, look, at the end of the day, when we're talking about this death toll, the IDF has actually, in my view, made military history in the Gaza Strip. The civilian to terrorist casualty ratio is actually very low when you look at how hard Hamas has tried to hide behind its own civilians. Every other house in the Gaza Strip, every building, every hospital, every mosque, Every school has been turned into a terrorist command post. And the world doesn't want to understand that, or it doesn't, it's not able to understand it. It's either naivety or malice, one or the other, but it's just not going to accept that we're dealing with systematic human shield tactics. I think that the IDF's achievements in this respect have been historic, and most Western militaries will acknowledge as much when you ask them. They say that what the IDF has achieved in terms of its operations and the number of terrorists it's killed, and the underground tunnels that it was able to neutralize, the way it moved overground and underground all at the same time, is absolutely historic, and the IDF deserves a lot of credit for what it's achieved in the Gaza Strip.
Well, that insight certainly isn't making headlines globally, no doubt about that. But an update on that breaking news development earlier, Ariel Osran, what can you tell us?
Yeah, another thing that the IDF needs to be commended for is its air defense capabilities. The IDF confirming that a drone that was launched from the east, usually codenamed to either Iraq or Yemen, but we know that Iraq is out of the picture now because those pro-Iranian militias have announced that they've stopped attacking Israel. So unless there's a stray launch from those militias, this is most likely coming from Iran. This was intercepted by the Air Force, either by intercepting missiles or by a fighter helicopter. But again, this incident is over and no known injuries.
Updates as they happen. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran, thank you very much for that insight and development. Now, talking of which, the Hamas terror group has taken responsibility for Monday's deadly terror attack in the West Bank village of Al-Funduk, in which 2 elderly Israeli women and an off-duty police officer were shot dead. The gunmen opening fire on vehicles as they passed through that village. The Al-Qassams Brigades, the military wing of the terror group, says the attack was carried out with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. It also says that the mastermind of the attack was Jafar Ahmed Dababzeh, who was killed by IDF troops in a West Bank village near Nablus on Wednesday. The 3 terrorists who carried out the shooting are still on the run. Now, it's not often one hears of a case like this one. Israeli police arresting an Israeli resident who was allegedly planning to carry out a suicide attack inside the country. The Shin Bet security agency and police saying 37-year-old Mahmoud Hassin Mohammed Boshkar from Kabul in northern Israel intended to make an explosive belt to carry out terror attacks. It's alleged he watched content explaining how to create explosive devices and had bought various materials in order to do so. And he'd also tried to recruit others to join him. He's been charged in court in Haifa. Yaakov Lapin, given your security understanding of this region, this is a highly unusual case. What do you make of it?
Yeah, we hear every couple of weeks that the Shin Bet is able to latch on to basically radicalized terrorists in the state of Israel who often go online, are exposed to either Hamas or ISIS ideology, and then, they start plotting. They start plotting terror attacks. And, the shame of this is that this represents such a tiny percentage of the Arab Israeli community, and they are disgusted by this as much as anybody else. But there is a small minority, very dangerous, that is exposed to this kind of propaganda that basically puts these ideological tenets into action by plotting terrorist attacks. Usually the Shin Bet is able to reach them before they act. It's an ongoing threat. And obviously, this is something that Hamas wants to see happen more. Iran wants to see happen more. All of the usual suspects have been hard at work trying to recruit and radicalize Arab Israelis. Most of the time they have failed. And in the small percentage of times that they have succeeded, the Shin Bet is there. It's something we have to keep an eye out. It is a constant danger. And by the way, it's not something that's so unusual for Israel. We have, lone wolf jihadists, running around the West as well. And we just saw an example of that in the United States. So this is actually part of a global problem. Of course, here it has its local, characteristics. But at the end of the day, this is something that all modern Western states have to deal with at a domestic level.
Shin Bet and police doing well to curb that potential attack. Now to Syria. Israel didn't waste any time when the Assad regime collapsed, moving quickly to make sure weapons abandoned by the Syrian army didn't fall into the wrong hands. The Air Force launching a massive wave of consecutive strikes on bases, outposts, and even suspected weapons plants. Today, the IDF revealing footage of some of the anti-tank missiles and explosive devices they have seized from abandoned military bases and sites. It's all part of what the IDF is calling a forward defensive operation as troops make sure residents of the Golan Heights are safe. Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran, you've been covering this region for such a long time. An interesting development, though, the IDF detaining and then releasing a freelance journalist inside Syria. Tell us more about what those troops said. What are you telling us?
Yeah, so basically the troops, there have been multiple incidents of Syrians approaching the forces in too close proximity. There have been 2 incidents of protesters that have been expelled by Israeli forces by first shooting in the air and also shooting in their direction. This is the latest example. A journalist and a fixer were reportedly apprehended by Israeli forces. They are being questioned, but beyond that, there isn't much that we can say at this point.
The IDF stressing its deployment of troops in the buffer zone is temporary. 30 seconds, Yaakov, is it?
Well, it depends on how you define temporary. Everything is temporary, but I think this temporary is going to be quite a lengthy temporary, period of time. As long as the situation in Syria remains dangerous, unstable, with radical actors, some of them sponsored by Turkey, running around Syria, I don't think those IDF forces are going anywhere.
Yeah, I just want to add that, of course, the IDF released the French journalist Sylviane Mercadier.
Thank you for the update, gentlemen. Much more to discuss. Stay with us right now, though. We're taking a quick break, and when we get back, it's red carpet treatment for Lebanon's new president, Army Chief Joseph Aoun. We unpack it all after the break. Stay tuned to The Rundown.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
这些完了弄完了以后，拿水往上一浇出来。来没来啊？没来吧？
Welcome back to The Rundown. It's been a long time coming. As of today, Lebanon has a president, Joseph Aoun. The Lebanese parliament electing the army commander after a void of more than 2 years, boosting confidence that the ceasefire with Israel could in fact hold. He has many challenges ahead, as our Emmanuel Honorat explains in this report.
Babda Palace isn't vacant anymore. Lebanon just voted in its next president after over 2 years of political deadlock. Lebanese Army General Joseph Aoun got 99 votes out of 126, 13 more than the 86 he needed in order to be voted in as president. The road leading to his election, however, was no easy task, with the Hezbollah-Amal alliance not awarding any votes to Aoun in a preliminary round of voting, giving him only 71 votes. After presumed negotiations and trade-offs during a 2-hour break leading to a second round of voting, the Hezbollah-Amal alliance appears to have softened their position on Aoun, allowing him to finally advance as president.
My pledge is to exercise my role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Supreme Defense Council, through which I will work to affirm the state's right to monopolize the bearing of arms.
International pressure on Lebanon's parliament to vote for Aoun as president couldn't be ignored. French envoy Jean-Yves Le Drian sat in the plenum watching over the vote, representing a series of countries voicing their support for Aoun, including Saudi Arabia and the US. The now former general of the Lebanese armed forces is now tasked with a mission to restore the country's crushing economy from 2019 and bring Lebanon back to its feet after a devastating war with Israel.
I vow to work for a country that invests in its army to control the borders and contribute to their consolidation in the south and their demarcation in the east, north, and sea. I vow to prevent smuggling, fight terrorism, preserve the unity of Lebanese territory, implement international resolutions, respect the truce agreement between Israel and Lebanon, and prevent Israeli attacks on Lebanese territory, an army with a doctrine.
With positive reactions pouring in over the election of General Aoun, a surprising accolade came from none other than Israel, with Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar stating that he hopes this choice will contribute towards stability, a better future for Lebanon and its people, and to good neighborly relations. With weeks to a deadline for the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire and Joseph Aoun dubbed in Lebanon as having a feel for battle, the new resident of Babda Palace has his work cut out for him.
And still in studio, Yaakov Lapin, host of the podcast, The Lapin Assessment on Patreon, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. Ariel, I'm going to start with you because you were literally watching the vote as it all unfolded. So much at stake after this vacuum of 2 years. Serious indeed, but there were also some lighter moments. Take us through what happened earlier on in this day.
Yeah, the vote for Lebanon's 14th president did not go without some lighter events. Some of the votes, it was either for Joseph Aoun or a blank ballot, but there was one for Bernie Sanders, the U.S. senator. There was also one for Joseph Amos bin Farhan. That is reference to Amos Hochstein, the U.S. envoy, and Yazid bin Farhan, the Saudi envoy, to indicate that that Joseph Aoun enjoys international backing. But if we're looking a little broader, you know, as Emmanuel described, there was a shift from the first round to the second round with Nabih Berri, the parliament speaker from the Amal movement, the Shiite Amal movement. He split from the traditional Shiite duo with Hezbollah. They were promised in a deal, according to Lebanese that I'm speaking with, the finance ministry, which is traditionally in the Amal party. So they received it once again. Wassim al-Mansouri expected to receive that. And if we, again, look even further back, the praise from Gideon Sa'ar, the message. He was the first foreign minister in the world to congratulate Joseph Aoun, who has big tasks ahead of him. He needs to take care of the south of Hezbollah's presence along Israel's border. He needs to fight corruption and also instill significant reforms. All these were talking points in his inauguration speech, setting his crosshairs on Hezbollah's weapons. The question is, will he be able to translate those words into action?
So that question is the one I'm going to pose to you, Yaakov. What do you make of Joseph Aoun as an army chief? How do you see this unfolding for the region and specifically for Israel and Lebanon.
Right. So, look, when he was army chief, Joseph Aoun was an interesting character. He walked down some sort of balancing act. And basically what he tried to do was to stabilize Lebanon, but without having a full-on confrontation with Hezbollah. Whenever he had the opportunity to confront Hezbollah head-on, he actually sidestepped that opportunity and didn't do that for pretty obvious reasons. He didn't have the firepower or the manpower, not to mention that a good chunk of his army is made up of Shiite officers and soldiers who themselves may have familial connections with Hezbollah or friendly relations, and Hezbollah basically infiltrated part of the Lebanese army. So that the general staff of the Lebanese army, I think its intentions are good to stabilize Lebanon and not let Hezbollah come back into the south. But part of the Lebanese army is collaborating with Hezbollah. So that is going to be one of the first tests, I think, that he's going to have to deal with. And as army chief, he will be the best placed person to try and take that on. I think ultimately from an Israeli perspective, and not only from an Israeli perspective, Lebanon is at the crossroads. Is it going to seize this opportunity now that Hezbollah has been severely weakened and basically get rid of this Iranian Hezbollah radical Shiite occupation of Lebanon that has been underway for decades and has brought nothing but ruin for the Lebanese people, including war? Or is it going to go back into old patterns, which is a kind of play where they pretend to be sovereign and a real country, but actually the real, decision makers are sitting in Tehran? That's the biggest question, I think, facing Lebanon, certainly from an Israeli perspective, but also from a Lebanese one, and only time will tell.
Ariel.
Yeah, so two things. One, I think the fact that the vote, even though it was a comic vote for Joseph Amos bin Farhan and not for Joseph Khamenei, indicates the shift that is expected to be seen in Lebanon under Joseph Aoun. But I think Yaakov was understating. It's not that the Shiite have infiltrated the army. They've pretty much taken over large parts of it, with 40% of the current military under the Shia members, where it's supposed to be 50% Christian, 50% non-Christians. The Christians are currently between 20 and 30%. And that is going to be another significant challenge for Joseph Aoun, to increase the membership, the part of the Christians in the military, and to make it less declarative military and more action military.
Many challenges ahead. We will be watching much at stake across the region. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Stay with us, because following the recent fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, a new campaign is circulating online targeting Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi with the hashtag "It's Your Turn, Dictator." Our Emma Siegel explains in this report.
1 month since Syrians toppled the Assad regime, unrest is brewing online in Egypt. The hashtag, quote, "It's Your Turn, Dictator," targeting Egyptian President Sisi, is trending across Arabic social media. The slogan is a play on the graffiti, "It's Your Turn, Doctor," written on a wall in Syria in 2011, aimed at the now ousted Syrian president. The anti-Sisi campaign began with Twitter user Ahmed al-Mansour, an Egyptian fighter with the Syrian rebel group HTS. In his post, he calls for the Egyptian people to rise against oppression. Meanwhile, Egypt's former Minister of Parliamentary Affairs cautioned against calls for an uprising.
Those who warn of the collapse of the state should stop eroding its foundations. It is to protect the people, not to oppress them, and to improve conditions, not to squeeze them, and to preserve dignity, not insult it, and respect its will, not to mock it or belittle it.
Since Sisi rose to power in 2013 following a military coup, there have been ongoing reports of disappearances and crackdowns on dissenters. With over 65,000 political prisoners in his jails, human rights groups say that torture has become systematic state policy. In a bid to manage public debt in 2024, the Egyptian government introduced austerity measures, slashing subsidies and increasing taxes. These steps have had significant impacts on the population. And now, with Assad gone, Sisi's grip on power is under increased scrutiny as the spotlight turns to his own authoritarian rule.
Intense fighting between Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish-led militias in northern Syria has resulted in dozens of deaths, further heightening regional instability. Turkey continues to pressure Kurdish militias, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan warning of a potential cross-border offensive, while talks are underway to involve US and French troops in securing a buffer zone to address Turkey's security concerns. More in this report by our Alex Schloss.
Fierce clashes between Turkish-backed forces and Kurdish-led forces have killed 37 people in Syria's northern Manbij region. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights say that 26 Turkish-backed fighters and 6 SDF militiamen, as well as 5 civilians, were the latest casualties in a widening conflict in the increasingly restive region of Syrian Kurdistan.
The northeast, as well as part of Aleppo city, remain under the control of SDF and YPG. Despite a US-brokered ceasefire near Manbij in December, there have been reports of clashes and exchanges of artillery fire between the SDF and the Syrian National Army forces in particular.
The latest battles come despite US efforts to address Turkish concerns in Syria, to dissuade their NATO ally from launching a major offensive against Washington's Kurdish allies.
It has been 14 years and this war continues. We thought that Syria today had entered a new stage after the fall and escape of Assad. We thought that we had gotten rid of all of this, but this attack on us changed everything. And those who came in are taking orders from Turkey.
Turkish-backed factions in Syria resumed their fight against Kurdish forces at the same time the rebel coalition launched their offensive, which toppled the Assad government. At least 322 people have been killed in fighting in the Manbij countryside since last month. Meanwhile, a Syrian Kurdish official says that talks are taking place on whether US and French troops could secure a border zone in northern Syria as part of efforts to defuse tensions with Turkey, after Ankara warned that it intends to carry out a cross-border offensive against the Kurdish YPG militia if the group doesn't meet Turkish demands.
The circle is closing for the separatist organization PKK and its YPG charter in Syria.
The YPG is the core force in the US-allied SDF and plays a key role in guarding ISIS prison camps. They have largely been on the back foot since the fall of the Assad regime, raising fears of a resurgent Islamic State.
Poland's president has reportedly asked the country's government to guarantee Benjamin Netanyahu won't be arrested if he attends a Holocaust memorial ceremony marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz Nazi death camp. Bloomberg is reporting Andrzej Duda has asked for the Israeli Prime Minister's potential stay later this month to be unhindered due to the, quote, absolutely exceptional circumstances around the event. Now, last month, Polish media reported that Netanyahu would avoid attending such events, fearing he may be arrested due to Poland's commitment to respect an ICC arrest warrant issued against him for alleged war crimes in Gaza. So for more reaction, we now welcome Avi Pazner, former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy and the former world chairman of Keren Hayesod United Israel Appeal. He comes to us from Tel Aviv. Good to see you, Avi. The irony is beyond tragic. In 2025, an Israeli prime minister may not attend a ceremony for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz because he may be arrested for alleged war crimes in Gaza. As a Holocaust survivor, tell us your reaction.
Yeah, I am, of course, amazed that this possibility even exists. But on the other hand, I must say that I am encouraged not only by President Duda's appeal to the Polish government. By the way, I hear from Polish friends that the Polish government will indeed is ready to give assurances to Netanyahu. We will see that in a few hours or in a few days. But there are a number of countries already who have declared that they would not respect this arrest warrant against Netanyahu. The Czech Republic, Hungary, France even has said that Israel being no part of the ICC, they will not respect that. United States, Argentina. I mean, the number of countries have already stated that they will not arrest Netanyahu if he comes to their country. Now, in Poland, I think it is particularly important for the Prime Minister of Israel to take part in these ceremonies on the 27th of January, which is the World Day marking the remembrance of the Holocaust. And I believe, I'm optimistic, Benita. I'm optimistic. I believe that the Polish government will give the assurances needed for that. Now, of course, there is, I don't know whether the health of the Prime Minister permits such a trip. That I don't know. But I would advise, as you said, as a survivor of the Holocaust, I would strongly advise the Prime Minister to take part.
We certainly will be watching to see how it all unfolds. Obviously, the optics of an arrest in a situation like this is just beyond something to even process, difficult to comprehend. Avi, your take in terms of characterizing the state of relations right now between Jerusalem and Warsaw. Many student tours used to take place. It used to take young Israelis to Poland, all part of the curriculum for many. Those education tours were stopped at one point over a spat involving teaching around Poland's role at that time during the Holocaust, but the visits resumed. How do you see things unfolding given this current state of tension between the two nations?
No, we had some problems, Benita, a few years ago with the previous government of Poland, which was a very nationalistic government and did not accept any responsibility, not only of Poland, but of Polish people that cooperated with the Nazi during World War II. And that brought about tension between Jerusalem and Warsaw. But this tension has eased since the latest election. And as you can see, President Duda is certainly friendly. And I told you, I am convinced that the Polish government will give the guarantees needed to Netanyahu. I think the days of tensions with the Polish are over. It is true that we stopped for a few years the travels of students group or children going to Poland, but we had also, let's not forget, we had the war situation here, and now we still have it. I don't know if we will see that in the near future, but I was pleased to see that after the latest election, relations between Jerusalem and Warsaw returned to normal, and the very fact now that Duda insists on Netanyahu coming, I think is a symbol of the bettering of relations.
Avi Pazner, former Israeli ambassador to France and Italy, always a pleasure hearing your insights. Thank you for being with us live from Tel Aviv. And thank you once again to our guests here in studio, to Yaakov Lapin and Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Always appreciate your updates and your insights, as always, here on The Rundown. Thank you. Now, one can only imagine the emotions on the pitch during this soccer game. Israeli football stars playing a friendly match with relatives and friends of the hostages in Gaza at the Hamoshava Stadium. More in this report.
There was no title or trophy to be won, nor any fear of being kicked out of the league. But Tuesday night's soccer match was a more important event, one that made the game secondary, raising awareness for the 100 hostages still held in Gaza and a deal that would bring them home. Held in collaboration with the Israel Football Association, the players wore yellow and white uniforms with the names of the hostages and the number 100 on their backs.
I think it's very emotional for everyone, you know, to be here and to play with the families and friends of the hostages, and we just hope that they will be back in Israel soon with the family, and we will all be able to celebrate. Really. But today, this is the minimum that we can do, and to come and respect and play with them, and hopefully bring a little smile to the families.
One by one, veterans of Israeli football took to the field, but unlike in the past, these players were not the stars of the event. These would be their opponents, the friends and family members of the hostages.
Today is a really special evening for us, families of hostages. We cooperated
with footballers here in Israel to do a friendly match in order to raise awareness in a critical moment of the negotiations, critical moment where we need support from the people of Israel, from the worldwide community as well.
For 2 hours, relatives of Shlomo Mansour, Omer Venkat, Romy Gonen and others put away their phones, along with the updates on the negotiations, to focus on something a little more trivial, but not less important, while expressing their desire for a deal. And now,
we can't miss the opportunity now of the negotiation, and we can't miss the deal. It's very important for us, and we know in football have many steps and to do a goal, and I wish now with the team of the negotiation make a deal, make steps, the right steps to bring all the hostages home.
the game ended with a draw.
And from that emotional story, we now move to the United States. Massive wildfires are still engulfing parts of Los Angeles. At least 5 people have been killed and thousands of homes and businesses have been destroyed, including many belonging to Hollywood stars. More in this report.
We are not out of danger. The National Weather Service has predicted that the winds are going to pick up and get worse. So it's incumbent that everybody have a wildfire action plan for their home if they live in a brush-covered area.
Hard to believe that after images like these, there is still worse to come in the Los Angeles area of California. Overnight, a wildfire broke out in Hollywood Hills as the firefighters tried their best to battle 3 other fires that killed 5 people, forced 130,000 people to flee, and turned the iconic area into a scene from Dante's Inferno.
It's real. People out here losing their clothes, their life, their family, their pictures, their everything that they have had.
On the Pacific Coast, west of downtown Los Angeles, the glamour-studded area was reduced to rubble, destroying the emblematic hillside area, with the Palisades fire being the most disastrous in Los Angeles history. Over 1,000 buildings were burned. Jewish institutions in the area were also affected by the fire, with the Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center engulfed by the Eaton fire. With the breadth of havoc wreaked upon the area, it's still unclear how this version of hell on earth might end.
Earlier on in the broadcast, we brought you news just in, a drone attack. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has an update. What is the latest?
A second drone attack within minutes. The IDF confirming that a second drone launched from Yemen was intercepted over the Mediterranean Sea. No sirens were launched as per protocol, given that there weren't any communities in the area. It was intercepted before entering Israel, but we're seeing that after a few days of no launches from Yemen, and the majority of launches were missiles in the recent period, we are seeing now that the Houthis are trying to remind Israelis that they're here and they're not going anywhere.
Despite the fact that there was a response recently in terms of Israel, not to mention the U.S. coalition as well, targeting terrorist sites in Yemen, not so effective so far.
Yeah, the effect of these strikes, both American-led coalition yesterday targeting 7 Houthi facilities, including underground storage facilities, and also the significant Israeli strikes in recent weeks. Their effect is marginal on the Houthis' capabilities. Yemen is a vast country. The Houthis have entrenched themselves significantly over the past decade. We know that aid from Yemen is ongoing till this day via the sea. And so these strikes are a retaliation and show the Houthis that their strikes cannot go unanswered. But as to degrading their capabilities or even stopping their strikes on Israel, these are far away from reaching that effect.
What more do we know about the Israeli defense systems intercepting these drones?
Right, so there's the drone threat, there's the missile threat. The IDF saying a short while ago that nearly 300 drones were launched by the Houthis since the start of the war. The number of missiles is way over 200, and Israel has a multi-layered air defense system. As far as the threats from Yemen and Iran are concerned, they're more robust systems as compared to what we're seeing from the rockets from Gaza. That is the Iron Dome. When we talk about these ballistic missile threats and drones, we're talking about the Arrow, the David Sling, and also the U.S. THAAD system, which was introduced into this Israeli multi-layered system not too long ago. It has already been operational and even intercepted a missile or ballistic missile or two. And so, again, with these strikes against the Houthis ongoing, the Houthis are, again, sending a message that they are here to stay.
The Houthi threat remains. We wait to see what response it brings. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran appreciates the updates on all these latest security developments, as always. And that is a wrap for this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
Итак, все очень просто. Мы с вами работаем 8 счетов, потому что нам эти хлопки понадобятся. Ровная стена.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week, we're going to focus on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest here in Israel and throughout the global Jewish community. And we're starting with our top 5 items in the Jewish world this week, presented by Nicole Zedek. Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. Here are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. An investigation by a U.S. Senate panel uncovered strong links between the Swiss bank, Credit Suisse, and the Nazis during World War II. The Senate report cites tens of thousands of documents claiming senior Nazi members stored money in Credit Suisse accounts. The bank had previously denied any relations with the Nazi Party or its members. Joe Biden has awarded Jewish businessman and philanthropist George Soros the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor in the U.S. His son Alex picked up the award on behalf of George, who donated billions of dollars to left-leaning and Jewish charities and has been the target of right-wing, often anti-Semitic accusations. Other notable Jewish recipients include businessman David Rubenstein and fashion designer Ralph Lauren. A representative of the Syrian interim government met up with the head of Syria's tiny Jewish community, giving reassurances over the country's future. Mohammed Badawrieh, an aide to Ahmed al-Sharaa, told the country's Jewish community, quote, "There's no more fear, there's no more secret police. We are a democratic state." Right now, there are only 9 Jews believed to be left in Syria. It was a big night for Jewish actors and films at the Golden Globe Awards. Most notably, the Best Actor and a Drama Award went to Adrien Brody for his role as a Holocaust survivor in The Brutalist, beating other nominees, including Timothée Chalamet, who played Bob Dylan in A Complete Unknown. The Brutalist also won Best Film and Best Director. And finally, Jews around the world celebrated the close of Hanukkah, the Festival of Light. Candles were lit outside the historically significant Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Ukraine's Jewish President Vladimir Zelensky lit candles with members of Ukraine's Jewish community. And Israeli soccer star Manor Solomon led a ceremony by the field in Leeds' Ellen Road Stadium. Now, a very happy Hanukkah to all those who celebrated. Those are your top items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
Just as anti-Semitic violence is sprouting up all over Holland, including an attack on Israelis and Jews at an Israeli soccer match in Amsterdam in November, now a Dutch war in court database has listed as many as 425,000 suspected Nazi collaborators during German occupation during World War II. Joining us with more on this chilling discovery is I-24 News correspondent Owen Alterman. Hello, Owen.
Hello.
So being here, again, it's still chilling to think about what had happened and the extent of the violence in November. But now to uncover this information, a country not that big, 500,000 sounds like a lot of people.
You're absolutely right, Emily. Look, I look back at what the population of the Netherlands was, 1940, 1945. This is about 5% of the population. 1 out of every 20 people living in the Netherlands collaborated with the Nazis. Wow. Think about that.
And it's interesting that it's taken this long to be able to reveal that. We know, of course, the story of Anne Frank. It shouldn't be such a surprise. Why take so long, you think, to uncover and release this information?
Well, from what I gather, I think 2 reasons. Number 1, obviously, the sensitivity, right?
Yeah.
And number 2, there are data privacy laws, data protection laws in the EU that are complicated and sometimes problematic. And even now, the information about people who are still alive, obviously, not so many of them at this point, right?
Yeah.
But the data about some of those who are still alive are still protected by those rules. People who have passed away, it's not. So part of this, I think, was the passage of time so that those regulations wouldn't get in the way.
Right. And some of those still alive, in a way, have probably been hiding from that. So in a way,
and think about the families. Yeah. Think about the families. I mean, these are people's grandparents.
About their grandparents, yeah.
Great-grandparents that are now going to be exposed. Now, this isn't as if this information's on the internet. You have to actually make a request to go in and to look and to search. But the information is out there for the public, Emily.
Wow.
Researchers can go in, individuals can go in, and people can find out. About 5% of the population of the Netherlands, 1 out of every 20 Dutch people, collaborated with the Nazis. 100,000 Jews, 75% of the Netherlands Jews died in the Holocaust, of course, including Anne Frank, but certainly not only her.
It's just so chilling to think about it. And as what we saw in Amsterdam, it was really like what people described as a pogrom. It was brutal in the street violence. But, you know, given that, we're seeing all over Europe, around the world, there are still Holocaust deniers. There are still some people alive to be able to tell the tale. But how do we fix this misinformation?
Well, obviously there's denial, but the bigger problem that experts talk about is Holocaust distortion, right? To say it wasn't so bad, or what Israel is doing as a Holocaust, here's an example, or in a lot of countries, especially in Eastern Europe, where a lot of the national heroes who stood up, let's say, to the Soviet Union in a place, or the Russians, right, in places like Lithuania or Ukraine, they're national heroes because they stood up to the Russians or the Soviets, but a lot of times those same people, Emily, in one way or another worked with the Nazis. So there's a lot of sensitivity in these countries around these issues, because on one hand, these are real national heroes among their publics, but on the other hand, Jewish organizations in Israel make demands. But again, even we have to balance needs, right, and interests. How much does Israel insist on taking account of Holocaust and confronting Holocaust history in those countries versus having to work with these countries in the here and now, inside the European Union or in Ukraine with its important position abroad? There are a lot of important questions, but coming back to the Netherlands, we'll say it again, 1 out of every 20 Dutch people collaborated with the Nazis.
That's just, it's just
staggering.
It is staggering, and I'm sure it's just as bad in other countries. Should they release similar databases? It's
absolutely. Along with the many righteous among the nations, along with the many righteous among the nations, we have to salute.
Of course, 100%. Thank you very much, Owen Alterman. Thank you again.
For sure.
The world's oldest Olympic champion, dubbed the Queen of Gymnastics, passed away last week at a Budapest hospital. Agnes Kellett narrowly escaped Nazi persecution, yet she triumphed in the face of adversity. She went on to become one of the most successful female Jewish athletes in Olympic history. Here's more from I24 News correspondent Jody Natelovitz.
Agnes Keleti, a Holocaust survivor and the oldest living Olympic medal winner, has died aged 103 after being hospitalized with pneumonia in December. Forced off her gymnastics team in 1941 because of her Jewish ancestry, Keleti went into hiding in the Hungarian countryside, where she survived by assuming a false identity.
I was Agnes Klein. Piroska Juhasz was a maid, and I swapped my clothes and papers. Of course, she didn't need papers. They just had to look at her to know she was a good little Christian girl.
While hiding in the countryside, she kept training in secret on the banks of the River Danube in her free time, overcoming the loss of her father and other relatives in the Holocaust to become one of the most successful Jewish Olympic athletes.
I was competing not because I liked it, but I did it because I wanted to see the world.
Resuming her career after the war, Keleti was set to compete at the 1948 London Olympics, but a last-minute ankle injury dashed her hopes. 4 years later, she made her Olympic debut at the 1952 Helsinki Games, winning a gold medal in the floor exercise as well as a silver and 2 bronzes. In 1956, she became the most successful athlete at the Melbourne Olympics, winning 4 gold and 2 silver medals. While becoming the oldest gold medalist in gymnastics history at age 35 in Melbourne, the Soviet Union invaded Hungary after an unsuccessful anti-Soviet uprising. Keleti stayed in Australia and sought political asylum, immigrating to Israel the following year, where she coached the Israeli Olympic gymnastics team until the 1990s.
These 100 years feel to me like 60. I live well and I love life.
Speaking of sports, a new sports program is turning dreams into reality for the most promising Jewish basketball players around the world. The Maccabi World Union has launched the inaugural year-long Maccabi Israel Sports Experience, where these young men get a chance to do what they love most while also getting the experience of a lifetime. Here's more in my next report from Kfar Maccabea. These promising young athletes are shooting for their future.
My name is Alex Kirievsky. I'm 17. I'm from Sydney, Australia.
My name is Jonathan Joel. I'm 24 years old, and I'm from Cranston, Rhode Island.
Levi Bano, and I'm from Montreal, Canada.
And this team is already in sync, only a few weeks since beginning a special gap year basketball program called Maccabi Israel Sports Experience.
When I came to Israel, it kind of like opened my eyes to people are risking their lives, you know, to fight for this country, and people are doing extremely important things. So for me to play basketball, it's like a privilege.
I think Israel is the best country in the world. It's amazing. I love the people here, the culture, obviously the food. You know, I love the shawarma here. It's a weak spot in my heart.
It's a dream come true for this dream team. They get to live on the Maccabi World Union's campus in Ramat Gan, and they get to experience all that Israel has to offer.
The bigger focus is to be able to play long-term in Israel, and Israel has professional sports opportunities unlike anywhere else in the world. So we're giving them a foot in the door to those opportunities.
My senior year, we ended up taking the team to the playoffs. It was the first time in 5 years, so that was kind of a big accomplishment. And then from there, in college.
Point guard Jonathan Joel credits his dedicated mom for keeping him on track.
She raised my brother and I by herself. You know, she was strict, but it was for the best. She's amazing. She's done all this by herself.
Levi Banon grew up in Montreal, the son of Chabad emissaries. His talent stood out, and he left the nest during high school.
In 10th grade, I moved to Los Angeles, and I went to school, Valley Torah, where we had the best Jewish team in the country for 2 years. We won the national championship for Jewish schools.
For Alex, athleticism runs in the family. His mom competed in javelin in the Sydney Olympics. He also has talent in the field sports, but says since October 7th, anti-Semitism has infected the sports world for him.
I've known this guy for years. Every single conversation, his eyes are darting down to my chest and seeing my Magen David. Next events we have, he gets his friend to come watch him compete. He gets him wearing a hoodie with the Israel landmass on it, but with a Palestinian flag in the middle of it. When I'm competing in my event, discus throw, you start facing the back. So, and there's a net. So I'm looking out the back, and he got his friend to stand in my line of vision when I'm trying to attempt a throw. He's pointing at him and he's doing this, go stand there. And I'm throwing that way and I'm facing this way. And I'm looking out the back of the circle, and I can just see the guy standing there with a massive hoodie, trying to get in my head.
Free Palestine! Similarly, Alex's father was the victim of violence from pro-Palestinian mobs the day the Sydney Opera House was lit up in blue and white.
I'm not going to say exactly what people were saying because not very nice language, but you know, this is this, Jews, 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 terrible stuff. And my dad just responds completely calmly and just says whatever they were saying about Jews, he would say about Hamas. And that obviously got a response of him being shoved, spat on, he got his Magen David completely ripped off.
The sky's the limit for them here in Israel, which is why many have long-term dreams of playing here professionally.
I wanted to continue playing, but only in Israel, kind of just to get in with the culture here, learn about my Jewish heritage. In terms of basketball, long-term is definitely playing for a contract for next year.
Israel?
Yes, I love to stay here and play professionally here.
Shalom from Israel. Am Yisrael Chai.
Changing gears as more and more descendants of Sephardic Jews forcibly converted during the Inquisition are discovering the truth 500 years later, but it's churning up deep emotions for many. But did you know many also includes scores of Native Americans from the United States, including our next guest, Elizabeth Kincaid Freed, a Native American Jewish activist and founder of Indigenous. And we are so happy to have you here in Israel.
Yay,
welcome, girl.
Thank you so much.
We met by Zoom a few years ago, and your dream was to end up being here, and here you are, which is a very interesting tie-in, growing up in the United States in West Virginia, thinking all these years you're 100% or nearly majorly Native American. Explain your journey.
So growing up in West Virginia, if anyone asked me what I am, I would just respond Black, white, and Native. That's, you know. Then I got into genetic genealogy, life-shattering. So I'm 8 ethnicities, belong to 14 genetic groups. Hello. It's been an unbelievable and random journey, but it's all by providential design.
Nothing is random. Yeah. Of course. So, you know, with that, there was a curiosity, and I think we know we've done a lot of stories on the descendants for hundreds of years, having to still be afraid of the Inquisition. People forget it wasn't a one-time thing. So over generations, this identity was kind of being hidden, and things you now realize are obvious. In your case, going to Catholic school.
Yes.
What was the feeling there, and was there just something you felt your soul was burning at that time?
Well, going to Catholic school and attending Mass weekly and then more often during certain holidays, there was a familiarity, but also a disconnect that I wasn't part of what was happening, the pageantry. And my mother told me, typically around back-to-school shopping time, we're not like them, you're not one of them, don't pray with them. So that always had me more curious. So I know that I didn't necessarily listen all the time. But even in my research, I could see where a male was sent to be a priest representing the family to keep them hidden and safe from the Inquisition, or women were sent to convents just to show outwardly that you're devout, you're a devout Catholic. So just untangling all of that is what I'm here to do.
Well, is quite a process, and you realize there's more discoveries. I mean, there's so many interesting customs, you know, unwittingly passing down. I'm sure for your mom, we're not like them. She probably heard from her mother, who heard from her grandmother and whatnot. So when you did find out your Sephardic Jewish ancestry, I remember some of it was the Dominican Republic, correct? So how did you feel? I imagine, one, exciting, but at the same time confusing that you've been, in a way, lied to, or many like you. History has kind of whitewashed over these facts.
Whitewashing. Well, I have a very safe, homogenous American name, Elizabeth Kincaid. So I fit in all of these spaces. Getting my DNA results and seeing these Sephardic surnames, Diaz, De La Rosa, Sanchez, Tejeda, just, hello, who am I? So once I dealt with really digesting that there's something disjointed, like I have not been told the entire truth, and researching and seeing I'm not alone. There are millions of us worldwide. The frustration and the anger that this was stolen from us, it's still being hidden from us, and that there is a real death grip to keep families' genealogies by the Catholic Church away from those who are finding out, hey, these family practices or epigenetic markers showing like families passing down responses to stress and triggers. Here to right a historical wrong, and I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to you, my husband Marvin Freed, to Ashley Perry, family name Perez, and Jeannie Milgram. Without all of you in this portrait,
thank you so much.
I would not be here doing what I'm doing.
This is a time that many, you know, Isaiah, this is a time that was, you know, predicted. So, you know, with that, you started your own nonprofit, Indigenous. Now you're here indefinitely trying to make Aliyah. I know you're waiting for your dog to get the proper paperwork. It's the only reason. But what is that pull? What is that calling for you to, like, take it and come all the way here for it to feel authentic?
I'm sure there's some archaic word that would describe it. I just don't have it right now. It is definitely a pull. I believe it's definitely visceral. It's ancient. I haven't pinpointed it yet. I don't know if I ever will. I believe so, but I don't know. It's when someone is lying to you and you know you're not hearing the truth, but when you finally hear the truth, you're like, oh, that's what it is. So that's the discovery. So every step of the way, it's like, yes, this is it. No, this is not. Oh, keep going, keep going. And
now here you are.
Here I am.
Here you are, living amongst all of us. Welcome. We love having you here. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing your story, and keep up the bravery, and much appreciated.
Thank
Elizabeth
you.
Kincaid-Fried, thank you. It's hard to believe that the timeless icon Elvis Presley would turn 90 this week if he hadn't died so young. Behind Elvis's larger-than-life persona was a real human being pondering the meaning of life. And his dear friend and so-called rabbi, as well as his hairdresser, Larry Geller, is keeping Elvis's legacy alive. He is the one who introduced Elvis to Jewish spirituality, leading him to not only don a Jewish Chai necklace, but also to put a Magen David on his mother's grave. His mother, Gladys, who held a secret that she only revealed to young Elvis, that they come from an uninterrupted maternal line of Jewish women. We are now so happy to have Larry Geller himself here with us. Larry, let's start with how you got started. You were an Angelino in the height of Hollywood, doing hair for the likes of Brando and Cary Grant, and then all of a sudden you're in Elvis's bathroom. Tell us what happened.
So, you know, I worked in Hollywood. We opened the very first men's hairstyling salon in America. And one day in 1964, my phone rang at the salon, and it was Elvis's people inviting me to go up to do Elvis's hair. Elvis was the celebrity of celebrities. I was so excited. So I followed directions, went up to Elvis's home. I walk into his front door, through his front door, and he walks up to me, shakes his hand, my hand. He says, "Come on, man, let's go into my bathroom. We'll talk, and you do my hair." I said, "Great." And I began to do his hair. It took me about 35, 40 minutes. I spritzed it, and I'm looking at him in the mirror, and I'm saying, what do you think, Elvis? He said, "Ah, beautiful, beautiful." He spun around in the chair, and he put his finger right in my face and said, "Who are you? Who are you, Larry Geller? What are you really all about? What are you really into?" I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. Here I am in the bathroom with Elvis Presley, the king of music and a movie star, the legend of legends. And he's asking me something so personal. And I said, "Well, Elvis, you know what I do. This is what I do for a living. But I hear what you're asking me. What's more important to me, more than anything else, is my search for God." He says, "Whoa, man, wait, no. You have no idea, Larry. Please keep on talking, because this is what I secretly think about. This is what I wonder." And I did. I told him about my background and why I got to where I was in life. And he told me about his stillborn twin brother. And he said to me, "Why me, Larry? Why me? Why did I survive and not my twin brother? What if he would have made it, not me? Would you be doing his hair right now?" This conversation led into a very profound conversation between the two of us, and we just clicked. And after 2 more hours, I said, "Elvis, look, Peter Sellers is waiting for me. I got to go back to the salon." He said, "Whoa, wait, I have a better idea. Why don't you quit your job and start working for me full time? What do you think?" And that's how it all began with me and Elvis.
Recently, we did an interview on the author of the book, The Jewish World of Elvis Presley, Roselle Chartok, but she's delving into so much. The Jewish community of Memphis embracing young Elvis when he was penniless, just had a dream. He even grew up as the Shabbos helper for a rabbi and his family who lived upstairs. Explain more about these influences and why they were so impactful for him.
When Elvis first came on the scene, this was like 1956. Everything is Elvis. Gold record after gold record. He's the king of music. He is a movie star. He's on tour in San Francisco. And at that time, a man by the name of Rabbi Fruchter, who lived upstairs from the Presleys in Memphis, where Elvis was a Shabbos goy. And he always was very sweet to Elvis, gave him little candies, patted him on the head, and was very encouraging about Elvis being a singer. And when Elvis cut his first record, he didn't have a record player to play it on. Rabbi Fruchter gave him that record, his own record player. So Elvis is on tour in San Francisco at a place called the Cow Palace, packed with people. The media was there. There's a press conference, and Elvis walks out, and Elvis looks, and the commentator asks him a question, and he said, wait, see that man back there? That's my rabbi.
Well, many have been saying for decades that Elvis lives, and even you said that he told you essentially, I am not dead, I live on. But if he didn't actually die young, he would be turning 90 this week, which is really just incredible to think about and to wrap our heads around. But where do you think he'd be in his journey if he were still alive today?
At age 42, he was very ill, as we know. He was doing some drugs, and his nutrition was the worst, and never exercised. He would have gotten healthy. He would have been here. And I truly believe he would have gotten so deep in Judaism, and he would have been producing movies, and he was a humanitarian. And breaks my heart to even think about it. 90th birthday. Wow.
Larry Geller, thank you so much for sharing your touching story, and also good luck on the special Elvis project that you are working on.
Emily, thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you in Israel. And this is so meaningful to me personally. And thank you again. And hopefully we'll do this again.